lot of critics of parental alienation scholarship have stated that alienating behaviors backfire or they boomerang because they don't work. Essentially that a child won't reject a parent unless that parent actually did something wrong, and that the parent can't influence a child to feel negatively. Critics like Joan Meyer have said that. This guy Benjamin has said that. In order to support their arguments, they cite research by Jenna Rowan and Robert Emery on two papers that they published where they reported what they called a boomerang effect, where if a parent tries to denigrate the other parent, that they found it actually made them less attached to the parent who was doing that behavior. They continuously cite that, and then they say because of that, we should ignore the 50-something studies that have been published on alienating behaviors because they don't work. As a social psychologist, I was theoretically trying to understand why they would make that argument when you look at the methods that they used in their studies, they couldn't conclude that, but yet they did conclude it. Like, there's no way you could conclude that by looking at the measures that they used. They made these really exaggerated statements about how alienating behaviors as a whole don't work. It's very rare when it happens, and that alienation specialists and scholars, it falls to us to have to prove why a child would become alienated from a parent based on a parent's behaviors if, it doesn't happen very often in their mind. They think it doesn't happen, so my colleagues and I decided that, let's try to replicate what they did, but let's actually measure parental alienation the way that most scholars talk about it, and using a new measure that captures all sorts of alienating behaviors, because we know that they don't all do the same thing, right? They all have different effects on people. And, as a social psychologist, one of the key areas of research that we look at is social influence. So it didn't make any sense to me that our critics are saying parents can't influence their children. I mean, common sense tells you that's not a good reason, right? I mean, there's lots of research showing that children learn almost everything about their world from their parents. They observe how they talk to other people. They learn how to self-regulate by observing their parents, or not. They learn all sorts of attitudes: eating, exercise, divorce, aggressive behaviors, directly and indirectly. They learn it from them. So how is it that they're saying this? We were testing some theories in social psychology, one of them being what we call social judgment theory, where we would actually be able to make a prediction that for a child that's aligned themselves with a parent, once they've done that, then their willingness to be receptive to the other parent, who's considered like an outgroup member, right? It's us versus the world. Once a child has made that alignment, they're not going to be very open to anything anybody outside says. Right? They're going to behave more consistently with other group members. And if that parent says how horrible the other one is, they're not going to think they're saying anything bad. They're just going to think they're telling them the truth. They're not going to react to it. They're going to say, they're going to accept it as reality because they're an in-group member. And the problem is, in the methods that Rowan and Emery use in their studies, they did not look at that. They did not consider it as a possibility. And they kind of lumped all the people together. They only used undergraduate samples, which is not a clinical sample. It's not a judicially involved sample. Now, so this first study that we presented on yesterday, it was a replication to try to test the hypotheses, but we made the opposite predictions that they did. We argued that the denigration and like loyalty-inducing behaviors and those types of things won't likely backfire if the child is aligned with the parent. We predicted then that the frequency, like that there would be differences in the types of reported patterns of behaviors of the parents. So some people reported that both parents were engaging in bad behavior. That's what we would call a loyalty conflict. Other people reported more unilateral use of behaviors by one parent. And so what we did is we used a measure of alienating behaviors that we created, and we also used a measure of alienation, which is an outcome in the child. Rowan and Emery, in their papers, their definition of what an alienated child is was, did they report their parents engaging in unilateral use of behaviors? Which is, you can't do that. You can't have a predictor and an outcome. They can't be the same thing. And a parent can do alienating behaviors and a child may not become alienated. They're not equivalent. And I think the irony for me is that this is something that critics often say about scholars of parental alienation, that we assume that all alienating behaviors cause parental alienation. Nobody's ever said that. They say that. And what's interesting is these are critics of alienation writing about this, and yet that's how they operationalize parental alienation in their own study. So they're doing exactly what they're accusing us of doing. So there were a lot of problems with their study. So what I presented was our attempted replication of it with a new measure, and we compared it to their measure to see if what we thought that maybe their questionnaire would create like defensive responding in participants if they weren't alienated, because they would defend the parent that's being attacked because they haven't aligned with those parents, right? They love them both. But the child who is aligned, we assume that you would see this kind of reactance, or you wouldn't see the same thing. You wouldn't see a boomerang. What we found was actually really interesting, at least in college students. We found that what was predicting alienation in the children was enmeshment behaviors by mom. So if mom was saying things like, oh, it's you and I against the world now, we're best friends, we're going to get through this together, that led to alienation. For dads, it was contact interference and alignment. So the more that they did that and they blocked access, the more that they asked the child to perform acts proving their alignment to them, like sign this court document, right? Or spy on mom or something, that was related to alienation. And then we found that when we looked at the attachment to the parent doing it, this is the boomerang part, we found similar results as Rowan and Emery. So loyalty-inducing behaviors, it's not quite the same as enmeshment. These are more like behaviors where like a parent might reward a child for rejecting a parent, or you might punish them for saying something positive, right? So it's a little bit more heavy-handed. So when a parent does that, or if they denigrate, like say bad things about the other parent, that was not likely to lead to attachment to the perpetrator. They were a little bit more distant from them. So we found similar results for that because it's an undergraduate sample. I think if we had actually had a clinical sample, we would see what we were expecting. But we did find is that the enmeshment behaviors, again, if a parent was engaging in those behaviors, the child was more attached to them. They didn't reject them. So there was no boomerang effect for that. And we also did some other analyses. We found that children who were alienated in this sample had higher levels of depression, elevated scores on DSM indices of psychoticism and negative affect, which I described in my talk as, that could be very difficult to treat clinically when a child is presenting like that, because those are features that have like a lot of cognitive distortions and a lot of resistance to treatment and mistrust, of a clinician's intentions. We decided to analyze the data a little bit differently. And towards the end of my talk, I presented some of these exploratory analyses, because what we started thinking about is maybe the enmeshment behaviors that parents are doing are mediating the other behaviors and the outcome. So what we mean by that is, let's say a parent engages in contact interference. That can then lead to more enmeshment. So if I'm spending all my time with a parent because they blocked access, and then we talk about, oh, it's just us, because it feels like just us, because there's nobody around, there's no other person, then that behavior leads to alignment. And I almost think enmeshment could be another way of calling it alignment. So I actually think we could actually measure it that way now. It's that alignment then that predicts the alienation and the rejection of the other parent, right? But what we found though is that it wasn't just contact interference. When we did that, was also extended family. So if you had a grandparent or other people who were saying, mom or dad is horrible, that is more likely to lead to enmeshment with the alienating parent, not rejection. So the boomerang effect won't work. It doesn't happen for those people. Now, I think for children who are not alienated, that would happen. You would have a boomerang effect. But, so that's what we reported. I would love to replicate it. We have to replicate it. There's limitations. It's self-report. But their study was self-report. It's college students. Well, their study was a lot of college students, right? Or the same age, similar samples. If critics now, after we get this published, it's under review right now, but after it's published, I'm kind of curious to see if critics will even acknowledge this paper. And if they try to say that they don't cite it because of methodological reasons, well, they shouldn't cite Rowan and Emery either, just because what they say confirms what they believe. So we'll see. We see a little politics here in terms of what people pick and choose to support their ideology. So Joan Meyer, the minute her unreviewed paper was posted online, 2019 paper that serves as the basis for a lot of legislation and policy. It's not peer-reviewed. When it was first posted online, Demosthenes Lorandos and I sat down and we, with another research assistant who is helping us with the project, and we decided to reach out to her to ask her for more information about her methods. And then I wanted to replicate it, so we asked our research team member, who is a lawyer. She's already kind of been very negative towards our alienation scholars. In our mind, she would be more receptive to maybe communicate with somebody who's of the same discipline as her, but she immediately shut her down, and she asked her, how many cases do you have on your caseload that are men or fathers? That's the question you ask when somebody asks you about the methods you're using in your study. And I was like, when I heard that, or when I read that response from her, I thought, wow, like, what is your goal of this? See, my goal is to seek knowledge and understanding. That response tells me that's not your goal. And so she refused to give us any information. And she just said, well, it's going to be in the archive, like, National Institute of Justice archive, so you can get it then. But a year and a half late, you have to wait a year and a half to get it, because she was late in submitting it. In fact, I think she even got sanctioned because she didn't get her materials over to them in time. There's a certain time period in which you have to do it, because that would have maybe made her under more scrutiny if her stuff was available. But even now, you can't get it. She made it where, even though it's publicly available cases, she's made it where you can't get it unless you get approval from university to access it. Now, Jenna Rowan and Robert Emery, I haven't reached out to them about it. Usually in science, you don't necessarily have to. I wouldn't say like, hey, why did you measure it that way? Because it's self-evident. And their study compared to like Joan Meyer's work. Joan Meyer's work, again, is never peer-reviewed, and you can tell there's no way you would be able to publish that anywhere, in my opinion. But my undergrads can write better. I'll just put it that way. But Rowan and Emery's, you read it and it sounds very good, but unless you know methods and you know kind of the theory and stuff, it'd be easy to read that and conclude, wow, that's a pretty good study, right? That was pretty definitive, but you got to dig deeper and actually look at what they're doing, and do the conclusions really match what they did? Are there still questions that haven't been answered yet? Did they consider those questions? And so usually in science, when that happens, even if you don't have a relationship with them, usually you would say, okay, here's what they said they did. I'm going to do the same, and I'm going to expand it. I'm going to ask these questions instead. And so there isn't always a norm about reaching out. Usually you just reach out if you have a question on what exactly they did. Amelie Paquin-Badreau and I presented some preliminary research yesterday as well at like 1 o'clock. We're doing a longitudinal study where we're looking at families. We're looking at families in trial level cases here in Canada, where they've been involved with the court multiple times. Most of these families we know are in court all the time, but we did our best to take cases where it was determined to have happened. Parental alienation was determined by the court after evaluating evidence from both sides, or a custody evaluator who, of course, also had information from both sides. Right? or maybe a family therapist, not who's only been shortly involved with the family, but has been really intensely involved with everybody in the family. It's less biased of a opinion than an individual counselor, right? Or somebody who's only known a little bit of the family. So if the courts decided that had happened, or one of these professionals decided alienation had occurred, we then tracked down as many previous decisions as we could, because we want to try to now look at, what do these families look like when they first came? What were these parents doing? What were the kids doing? And subsequently, what is being reported after that? And so we're in the process now of coding that. So that work, we're not going to be, it's a very time-consuming task. We've been working on it for 1.5 years now, and we still have another year to go, I'd say at least. If I was to continue, here's the next questions I would ask. Now, you all go do it. That's what I'm going to say. These are already questions that will help the field if these questions are answered. I want to be clear that I'm not an advocate. I'm a scientist. My research supports the opinion of advocates in this space. But because it supports them, my critics have called me the darling of PA world, that everybody, I somehow, like Joan Meyer has told people that I somehow charm these reviewers into publishing my crappy work, essentially. Like I have some magic to make all these, fool these people to publish my research, which is very rich. Anyway, but I've heard her say that. People have sent me quotes of things she said about me that I'm like, that's a very odd thing to say. And then I've seen other writings of people, mostly written in really bad journals, like that have very low quality journals, who've written just opinions about my work. If they have a problem with some of the conclusions I make, well, then go do your own study and see if it's true, right? Or, verify it. Don't just label it as bad. But they said, oh, well, the study that Dr. Harman did, this was good, this was good. They used open science practices, they did this good. But she's an advocate, so she's biased and her results can't be trusted. Where did that come from? And just because maybe I've been a president of International Council on Shared Parenting, that doesn't mean I'm an advocate. I'm promoting the science. There's a lot of different opinions. But the critics walk around and then say we're all like-minded and we're all the same. We all think X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, well, have you ever been to this conference to actually talk to us and see that that's not true? I'm very irritated, kind of even just sitting here at the conference and hearing and seeing on social media during the conference people posting these completely inaccurate things, and they're not even here to see it. Maybe the people who are saying that have unresolved trauma, and they're watching it, and they're kind of reliving this, or they're reliving the dynamic of listening to people who have no real reality experience with, they don't have their own reality experience with PASG, and they're listening to others, and they're getting, wrapped up into that belief system that's not based on their own experience. Not their own reality. They've never been to PASG. They've heard what other people say and kind of believe it. And sadly, I think that they don't realize that they're kind of reenacting that that's an alienation dynamic. They're buying into someone else's opinion without basing it on their own lived experience. It's harming all the progress, I think, that we're making. And I think it says, heal thyself, right? That's my message. It's to parents. That's what we're trying. We're trying to have everybody heal. This whole family system needs to heal. But we're seeing it even for advocates who have the best intentions. I think sometimes I'm seeing, at least on social media, I'm not saying this of everybody, but some people on social media are doing this, and it's very bothersome to me. And you can't challenge them on it because, how dare you tell me I'm reliving my alienation trauma? Who are you? And you're not me. And, so you can't even do it. But that's just sort of my observations of what I'm seeing, because I'm seeing lots of opinions expressed that are not based on true lived experiences. That's not okay.